Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is November 12th, 2025. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy hearing Indigenous content by the Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for already showing your support. For those who cannot afford to give, I would love to hear from you at Native YYC. Send your comments or questions. Also giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can subscribe, or you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And always remember to share the things you learned to your network. Oki, naganago, meko che chistokomaki. Nara daga de kots nagotine siku saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson. I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clinchotine, Indahe, and Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces, and the more non-Indigenous people you are with, the more racism that you will then not experience. And my late great grandfather is Milo B. Wool in Delaney. His daughter Alice is my now late great granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene First Nation. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous people's inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. I am not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples. I share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this racist, colonial, misogynistic world in 2025. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism and capitalism, but it would be a part of a meaningful treaty partnership, meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. As a former geomatics drafter, I'd be happy to teach you more, but you'll have to pay me. Go to nativecalgarian.com for more. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this British Westminster system named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Bob, I can't thank you enough for being on the podcast today and talking to me about your wonderful book. I'm so excited to talk to you about it. I, first of all, have to tell you, the work that you've already published that goes out on the internets, I've been sharing that for like 10 years. As long as you publish something, I try to share it because it's so easy and digestible. And just like in your book, you're so humble. So Masi Cho, thank you for coming on my show and doing all this great work you do. And your other book, 21 Things You Need to Know About the Indian Act. Even my own daughter, I'm just always rambling and rambling talking about the Indian Act. But when she read that book, it changed her too. And I try to tell people, like, everybody should have that book. So, needless to say, when you came out with this new one, 21 Things You Need to Know About Self Government, I was like, thank you. I read Jody Wilson Rainbow. I've read all of her books, actually. And I seen that you had referenced her book as one of the things to read as well, which I appreciate all of the resources you put, including the TRC. And so your book for the Indian Act, I think, has been really eye-opening for a lot of non-Indigenous people, but also Indigenous people. So,
Hmm.
and I just want to ask you this big overall question of, like, how did you get started doing corporate training, talking to people about that, and what would you say maybe to newer folks, the next generation coming up, trying to do the same work?
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, there's 94 calls to action that they survivors have asked us to get engaged with, and so you don't need anybody's direction or advice or anything. We've been called. That's all I can say. And so I'm glad that people are thinking about jumping into the jumping into the conversation. For me, I was doing this work before it was even fashionable, even a thing. It was literally 1994. I bumped into a Stalo lady outside of some elevators at BC Hydro, where we were both working. I was working in advertising and display, and she was working in what they call Aboriginal relations. And we talked briefly, and she said, "How would you feel about putting on presentations for the employees?" And I thought, I'm in advertising and display doing accounting stuff. This sounds interesting. So I said I would love to. And I didn't realize what she was after was what would become Indigenous awareness. And certainly the term Indigenous awareness appears in at least three of the calls to action. And where the survivors were saying, we think it would be helpful for you. But yeah, so that was really the in, and it was a scripted sort of corporate presentation, and we delivered it. And fortunately, we're able to refine as we learned because there's no place I could go to copy or steal or cheat or whatever, ask nicely. And so, that was really it. And, over the time I was with Hydro, I talked to over 4,700 Hydro employees, and I really just learned how to talk to people. I'm thankful to this day Hydro let me cut my teeth and experiment because, I would try something one day and the feedback would be, oh gosh, I can't take that, and go in the next day with a refinement and and that really just helped me learn how to talk about Indigenous issues. And probably the hardest thing for anybody thinking about doing this kind of work is dealing with the emotions that are Indian Act topics like taxation and housing you know, um, and I can remember, my biggest aha moment was I was in a place on Highway 16 between Prince George and Prince Rupert, and I went in and I was talking to a group of power line technicians and then some of the admin team who were largely women, and I thought it's going to be maybe a tougher crowd today. These power line technicians speak pretty freely. They live in the back of the bucket truck. And so I thought this will be interesting. But I got a, I got, I got a surprise that day. I just call it a spaz out happened. And, with swear words too, like two full breaths, you freaking Indians, you don't pay taxes. And, just and I was like, that was a lot of emotion to be flying at me. And when she ran out of breath the second time, the linemen all went, yeah, and I can remember I was like, okay, where's the door here?
Right?
Just
Am
in
I going to
case.
make it out? Do I need a police escort?
Am I going to be running here? Yeah. So and I can remember after she finished talking, I said, I thought about it. It's like all of the questions in my whole Indigenous awareness course, she had summed up into two full breaths, including swear words and vitriolic anger and hatred. And so I thought the only thing I could say was I can't answer it all right now, but I said, good. And what? Didn't you hear anything I said? It kind of re-triggered her again. And I said, I heard it all. I wouldn't repeat it. And just so you know, I'm going to be gone in about 2 hours. You have to work here. And for everybody else, we want that safe space just for you. And and I said, it's good because it's funny you feel the way you do about these subjects because the people you're talking about feel very passionate about them too. And I think it's good that you want them to change. And I said, here's the rub for you.
Mm,
You know, you and I are just two little fish in a giant ocean of 35 million fish. And what I want and what you want, I mean, that's one thing. But what gets decided by the broader body politic, that is way outside of our control. So all I can say is I think you're asking for change. And I think you should be mindful because it's not going to be the kind of change you're asking for, regardless of your opinion and ideas. And
yeah.
I'm just giving you a heads up so you're not so disappointed later.
I
And
think that person's very lucky to have had you try to gently tell them that.
yeah, yeah. And I said, but it's good that you want change. And, you know, after that, I went away from that session and I was still on the road doing session day after day. And I was, it was like, it bothered me though. It's like deep down, I was worried that this poor lady had jeopardized her career. And, but, you know, she was very passionate and also, how bad do I want to get up every day and have people yell at me about anything, right? And
Yeah.
although I did do that, I worked in customer services, talking to the happy 2% of our customers, took 95 calls a day or something, and got yelled at quite frequently because we weren't doing such a good job as a utility. But, you know, I thought, how bad do I want to do that? And so
Yeah.
it really got me thinking, you know, and it took me a few weeks to come up with this answer. I thought, you know, so what I'm working with here is the, and this will be for anybody who wants to take this on. What I'm working for is to try to not let things get emotional when you're talking about this stuff. Because as soon
True.
as people get emotional, they don't listen, right?
Yeah.
They're gone. Nothing you can say. All they hear is a Charlie Brown teacher, right? And we really want them to listen, and we want to create a safe space. So you know, I've had other indigenous people say you're doing it wrong. You need to be angry. You need to lead them into a dark place and take them out. And you know what? It didn't work on the survivors. They were
Yeah.
angry with those kids. They never changed. It made them stronger, you know, in a sense. And so my goal became to how do I make this comfortable and easy for people to understand and not, you know, I'm not here to convince you of what's right or wrong or fair or not fair or equal or unequal. You get to think about all of that after I'm gone. But I will tell you how different people see the same thing. And what I realized though was I can ask the question before they do. So if you took one of our Indigenous awareness courses, so how many of you've heard that they've been conquered? Well, we're going to talk about that now. And, you know, I can say that and you can see people going, yeah, they're totally conquered. You know, they're not saying it out loud, but they're not emotional either, right? They're like, I have heard that, you know, very, very conservative people without good poker faces. And, but by asking the question, first, they don't have to get emotional. I have heard that. I wonder what he's going to say about this, and then I can approach it very pragmatically with just valid and reliable information. And
Uh,
I tell them in the beginning, this is a safe space. If you're worried about how your question might sound, you can always say, what do you say to those people that say this, Bob? Because I know you have to work here after I leave. And so we really worked hard to safe space people, to give them a chance to learn, to be willing to accept and hear the information and honestly change. And I saw a lot of it. I can remember going into a session in a place called Terrace, and you know, I kind of usually start with a little round table. What do we want to get out of this session? I can remember a guy saying, I want to know why the heck we're doing treaties. I don't think we should be doing them. And and I was like, ah, good one. And we're totally going to talk about that. It's going to be great. And you know, by the time I'd left, he was like, what the heck is taking so long with these treaties? Why haven't we done more of these things? Right. And I was just like, yes, job well done, you know. And then also for those same people that might get into this space, um, 10% of the people will that you're talking to will never agree and support with what you're saying. 10%. already agree with and support what you're saying. And so what you're doing is you're talking to the onion in the middle. That's what I do. So if you ask me a really forceful, angry, you know, bigoted, I don't care what kind of question it is, right away I stop looking at you and I start talking to everybody else. Hey, thank you for that. Let's just talk about free housing for a minute, and I'll just start scanning the crowd. So it's never confrontational, and hopefully, and thank you for your feedback. I think that comes through in the books, what works with people, and to translate that into the written word, people, those are the nice words for me. It's easy to understand and non-confrontational, and and so that to me is a job well done. You know.
And it is, when you get feedback like that, it feels wonderful. But I just know for me as a Native woman who has tried to do that training, um, and I may continue, but I'm just on a different journey at this moment. Just that bigger picture that I've been trying to engage with people in the best I can. And it is like exactly what you said. Some people are never open to it. Others people are absolutely are. And I just find I even tell people if you haven't read the TRC, if you haven't read anything by Bob Joseph, if you haven't read and the MMIW report, like I don't even know if we're on the same page. And I recommend Robin DiAngelo's books a lot
I
about
like her too.
racism.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think she really breaks it down really easy. And because she's white, white people will typically be more open to what she has to say. So
Mm,
that I find that these are things that help move us forward a bit with people who are like just unwilling to have these conversations about all of the conversations we need to have in order to move forward. And
mm,
it is a shame too. Like I think about the Mayflower routes. If it wasn't for the natives that were there and saved those people, those 100 people would all be dead. No question.
yeah.
So the graciousness I have seen Indigenous people give new folks coming here with the assumption that humans will treat humans well, like this warring concept that people have, it like that is such an imported belief system and something that other people did that was a horrible atrocity. We talk about genocide quite openly, both in the TRC and the National Inquiry, and that's a word that just seems to upset everybody, but that's what it is, right? And these are just words that I have to say. And so I just really appreciate having folks like you really paving that way so that I can give people resources at the end, at the beginning, and just encourage people to continue their learning and go, if you don't like what I have to say, that's okay. Here's a whole bunch of resources where you can hear it from other people so that way maybe if you hear it a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, you'll be more open to it. So I
Yeah.
appreciate everything that you've been doing to help us move this conversation forward and doing it like you said long before it was cool. When the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples came out in 1996, like that was such a hard conversation to have. They had over 400 recommendations. And I remember Murray Sinclair clearly saying, we had to narrow this down to 94 calls to action because recommendations get dust on a shelf and they won't go through 400. They might go through 94.
Mhm. Big mate.
They might.
Mhm.
And just being, I was in Edmonton I was in Calgary at the hearings, and I got to hear like firsthand from my elder, speak about his residential school experience, and then up in Edmonton, like that meme that goes around. It was like all the natives in the world were here. That's what Edmonton felt like too. And I
Oh
got
yeah.
to meet everybody. I met Murray Sinclair. I probably met you that day too. Like there was so many folks that I had met that day. I couldn't believe. Well, it was 4 days, so over that course. And
You could have met my dad for sure, Chief Doctor Robert Joseph. So I get confused for him a lot. And
there you go.
yeah, yeah. But yeah. And Murray, I like Murray, and would learn from him too. He was just such a great soft touch speaker. And I think that's what it takes, to be able to communicate with people. And I in the course of my hydro work, I thought we just got to find the way to communicate in the way that people will listen. That's really the goal. And nobody likes to be yelled at. And so if we can talk very nicely and convincingly that this is, in your interest to learn about this stuff, they will listen. A lot of times people will listen and become real allies. I give, I was in, I think we bumped into each other in Calgary at the festival there. I had two groups of 350 kids. It was amazing. They were like, to see this generation versus mine and the ones, where the survivors were still in schools, quite a dramatic shift. But, in one of the sessions, I think the first one, I kind of did a really short talk because I want to have a conversation about the Indian Act and dismantling it. And I stopped talking, and one of the kids stood up, hand on his hip, in front of 350 colleagues, and he said, "What do you want us to do?" I was like, "Oh man, hashtags! You got to get hashtags." And I said, sometimes, when it comes to having conversations, especially with your family, which is, an important place to have them. I said, to the kids, I said, you gotta, you know, if it's safe. So you don't want to blow up the family over something. If it's safe and if you feel comfortable, if you feel passionately about it, you know, we all have that one uncle that's been able to say things. It could be an aunt or
Yeah.
somebody that's been able to say things their whole life and nobody's ever challenged them. If you feel safe, challenge them. And it doesn't have to be a direct in your face arm wrestle or fist fight. You just have to say, Uncle, I've heard that, but I've also heard there's a little bit more to that. Sometimes that's
Yeah.
all it takes to end
Yeah.
the conversation. They'll go away thinking, maybe I don't know what I don't know. And I said that would be, in my view, that would be a big victory to do that, in our family groupings where we always just let Uncle Archie say stupid stuff. And they were pretty good with that, but I kept emphasizing, it's got to be safe.
Yeah. Well,
And
and they got to be open. I just don't even have that conversation with a lot of family members. I had a former an uncle who's passed away since of cancer, and he was actually a pretty good advocate for trying to talk about these issues, but
mm,
he has since passed away, and so you always find that safe family member that you can have
mhm.
some conversation about it with, because
Yeah.
the truth is I was very confused for who I was, where I came from, all of those things. My mom, she got her status reinstated in about 1985, 1986. And I had
Mhm.
an aunt, and she just passed away actually, but she became a lawyer. And she was the first one that really worked hard at making sure we all got our status back. And so, and then I had Marie Sinclair basically say, Michelle, you get your daughter that status. And I'm like, I can't say no to Marie Sinclair. And you
Mhm.
want to know, the ironic part? She got her status, it got sent in the mail, and they had processed it on September 30th. So
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
was working through TRC Day and got my daughter's status, and that's the date that's on there. So
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool.
yeah, yeah, I
Uh,
think if it wasn't for all of the folks in my life, folks like yourself, paving this, I couldn't be doing this podcast and so confidently telling people these are resources. Because typically that's what people ask me. And because I have a
mm,
background in geomatics, I tried to teach people about why it is we say the words we say around land acknowledgements. But as you know, a lot of them kind of became more performative, and a lot of folks didn't really want to understand it. So sometimes they can be a bit harmful, but at the same time, it is a great way to start that Indigenous education. So that's why I would try to have that podcast, try to run for office, try to talk about the things I needed to talk about in the hopes that we could make some meaningful change together. And that's always going to be my goal because the TRC, it hit me how many of our elders like told their deepest, darkest, shameful moments of their life in order for me to be here at this moment. And when I read what happened in Fort Providence at that Indian residential school, I can't believe I have so many aunts and uncles, let alone cousins now, just grateful that somehow everybody was able to survive for me to be here. And then even when I think of the Mayflower and all the things that happened on that side in order for me to be here, it's like you have a responsibility to speak truth. You have a responsibility to try to educate. So I haven't figured out how to make a business business model of my of doing any of this, and that's why I appreciate your book and Indigenous Economics by Carol Hilton. She does that great work too. For me to try to be a little more inspired about, owning my own or my own company and engaging in a positive, constructive way in that way. And then with media, not getting the media through an Indigenous lens. Like I still see that as a bit of a shortcoming. So having your book, having you on, hearing you speak over and over again to so many wonderful people. I hope you're inspiring not just me, but the next generation. And hearing that kid say, "What do we do?" That's the best part about what you do. You give the solutions. Here are the solutions. Do this.
hmm Yeah, little hints and tips, actionable, and land acknowledgments are so important. And people have said to me, "Well, they're performative. Should we still be doing them?" And I'm like, yes, because they're performative maybe for the person delivering, but for everybody else, it's like the national anthem at the beginning of a hockey game. When you hear over and over and over again that, the indigenous peoples around you have a legal interest in lands and resources from the 1960s to today, that's just light years of change, light years, quantum leap. And you don't own anything, Bob. You were too primitive and we conquered you. And yep, right. Now you can't hardly go to a meeting without a land acknowledgement. So people say, well, I don't get it. I just think they're performative. And I will always say, well, it's good though that you're really thinking about this. But what we're really doing is we're preparing the next generation. We are planting the seeds that are going to grow into trees that have fruit on them for our kids. And so for them to grow up in a world where land acknowledgements are at the hockey game, the football game, at your corporate meetings or part of school, stuff, by the time they have to deal with very complex legal issues like rights and title and treaty rights and all of that kind of stuff, they're going to be way more equipped fundamentally. Personally, they'll go, "Oh yeah, they have a legal interest. We should deal with this." Where in my parents' generation, that they're incapable. Now we own it, lock, stock, and barrel. We conquered you. You know what I mean? Like, so for something as simple as a land acknowledgement, it does so much to help people think and understand. And now, you've got the land acknowledgement for new immigrants. And I mean,
Yeah.
it's amazing. But for everybody that's thinking about this kind of work, yourself included, it just takes time. There's that analogy of this is, the Titanic hit the iceberg because it's so slow. It, saw it from quite a ways away, but trying to get it to turn sometimes, even if you're full rudder, you
It's
know,
true. It's
yeah.
true.
So
My
I think,
goodness.
yeah. So to be patient with yourself, and in terms of making a really good living, if you can learn how to talk to people in a way that gets them to listen and watch, I think you're on to something. I
Good
see lots
idea.
of shingles come up from the TRC, and the more people you can get to listen to your message, obviously, the better it is for a podcaster. Uh, when we wrote 21 Things, it was a blog post.
Yeah. I
That was
remember.
the first one, yeah.
Yep.
And it was just because I'd read an article on how to be a better blogger. People like lists and they like them 7 to 10 long. I didn't listen to that part, but
I love
but
that. One
yeah.
of the things that you said recently when you came to Calgary with WordFest and talked about your book was that we are coming up on a really important anniversary of the Indian Act and how this is why the impetus of this book and such. I was wondering, would you mind kind of giving a little more about that to my podcast listeners so that they can understand this anniversary and why it's so important and using these hashtags that you have nicely in your book?
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you for that too, by the way. So the Indian Act was consolidated in 1876. It's one of the major consolidations. There'd always been piecemeal laws governing Indians even before Confederation, but by 1876, this country had a solid view of what was going to happen. They were going to assimilate and become like everybody else. And it was being done for reasons like this is a dying race of people. They're not fitting in militarily and economically. And so what we have to do is help facilitate this transition because they didn't have immunity to smallpox and influenza and, just some of the diseases that other people had been exposed to and had developed immunity. And so that, that that was, sorry, I forgot the question. I got into the smallpox and my mind just went in a million
Yeah,
places.
we were talking about the Indian Act and the
Oh, yeah.
importance of the anniversary coming up next year and
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
you're using that, your book and this hashtags to kind of talk about the gravity of that. But I think obviously that conversation came from like there's so much in the Indian Act too.
Mm-hmm.
So I totally understand where you're going. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a birth to death document. It was designed specifically to assimilate people, even though we gave up Elder Trudeau and Chrétien published the 1969 white paper policy paper. They were really taking a look, soul searching for the country in 69. They were tasked with what do we do about this document? And that really was a change from we're using this document to take away the kids to ban their potlatches and powwows and all of the stuff of the Indian Act. So it really signaled an opportunity to what do we do with this? And they came up with their white paper policy paper that said, we're going to transfer title of the reserves. We're going to get rid of the Indian Act, and that'll make us a more just society. The chiefs countered with a red paper policy paper. What they heard from the white paper policy paper was that you're just going to cut us loose now with little or no opportunity to pick ourselves up and look after ourselves. And so they countered with the red paper policy paper. That led into the conversation around the Patrioted Constitution of 1982 and the inclusion of Section 35 of the Constitution Act. And so it really marked a change. In 1982, we said we're going to recognize and affirm the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal people of Canada. So the existing Aboriginal rights are language and culture and, all of those things that are really quite important. So the stage was set in 82 to begin moving away from the Indian Act. And we're still having that conversation. It's an important year because it's been around for 150 years now. And at some point, if it lasts another 150 years, we're not going to make it. Even with registering your children, and I'm glad Murray told you to do that. We
Yes.
we register your daughter, but
Yeah.
is she able to register her daughter? And at some point, the Indian Act's winning, right? It just, we're running out of people who meet the requirement. And for your podcast viewers and listeners, the name of the game for us is cultural survival. How are we going to be here in 150 years? And the Indian Act wins way before then on the status stuff. So, today for people like yourself where you are in your journey, which you've described, Murray, you got caught up to Murray. He said, register the kids. That's a good place to be. But really, if we want to protect your kids, the seventh generation principle,
Yeah.
we need to, and this is what we talk about in the book, we need to start talking about citizenship that's
Yeah.
driven by us. Nobody in Ottawa gets to tell us who our people are. That's
No.
just, if you can start with that fundamental belief, then you're on the right track to self-government because we're going to
Yes.
decide who our people are. That lets us look after all of our people, not some of our people, and a shrinking sum of our people under the Indian Act. And so
Yeah.
that's the self-determination piece. Who gets to decide that, and who gets to run our lives, and so that is the pivot point that we're at in society right now. And my mom and dad were the same. My wife, Cindy, who's non-Indigenous, they wanted us to get buried before 1985 so she could be a status Indian, which is a whole
Yep.
nother path and journey for people. She would have been a status Indian. We decided not to get married because she was going to law school and we talked about it quite frankly. She might not like me when she gets out and or vice versa. Probably would have been the other way around though. But self-determination and then self-government, we have to break free of the dependency of the Indian Act. And it really does hinder us. When
Yes.
I graduated from business school, Camosun College Business Administration. I studied credit. and I met the requirements of somebody you'd want to lend money to, post-secondary education, married, really good job, BC Hydro. There were what they called 4 C's of credit. I met them all, but I couldn't borrow the money to buy a vehicle without Cindy, my wife, who's non-Indian, co-signing, even though I worked for BC Hydro. One of the best employers. If you're a lender,
Sure.
hands down.
Yep.
And married, post-secondary education. Yeah, this we can't get this guy credit cards fast enough, and we want to
Wow.
lend him as much as. But yeah, they were like, as soon as I declared the exemption, which many Indians believe is a big benefit, you can get stuff delivered to the reserve. As soon as I declared the income or the transactional tax exemption, that's when the banker said, "Do you have somebody who can co-sign for this?" It kicked me out of the mainstream economy.
I'm
And
not gonna lie, that's very upsetting to me because as like I've watched women go through that just in general,
mhm,
and then to see a status man being talked to like that, that's really it just shows you how far we've come in a short period of time, but it's still really demeaning. And I don't think that, like that story, I hope will resonate with the youth that listen. I
mhm,
can't believe youth listen. I am so grateful to every one of you. My daughter rolls her eyes rightfully at me most of the time. And
mhm.
so it's wonderful to have youth listen. So thank you to my youth listeners. But again, the idea of a woman being able to have credit, but now listen to a status man tell you that. So I just wanted to reemphasize that, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's in our lifetime,
And
and
it's
I've
still
seen a
going
lot of
on.
change, but geez, it's not enough.
Yeah. So we were looking at a place in Victoria, and this is for kids that want to drive the nice car and live in the nice house and, the dream, the Canadian dream, right? We uh we were looking at buying a place on Reserve South, which has 99-year leases that you can renew for additional 99 years up to 1,000 years. And I thought, that's pretty close to residential real estate investment. And my wife and I actually have rental properties and a house. Like we've done really well. She was a lawyer. I've had this career going,
Mhm.
and we thought, yeah, let's buy one there. But the realtor said we're going to put subject to financing, which I didn't think would be a problem, and subject to insurance. And she said, Bob, just put it in there. Just, humor me just in case, subject to financing, subject to insurance, and all of the other things that we wanted on the property we were going to buy. And so we got into it, and we actually have lines of credit on other properties. And but what we realized very quickly is still access to capital markets for me because we were going to do it in my name, and they wouldn't. It was hard to get them to lend me the money. Like we were running out of time
Mhm.
in a generous amount of time to access the loan to buy the house. And the realtor just said, okay, this is taking quite long, but why don't you just start working on the insurance? And very close to the property we were buying was an insurance company that we assumed had probably done a lot of the insurance on these properties. So the realtor said, why don't you go check these guys out? I went there, and that, you know, that was the second hurdle. The first hurdle, we thought, in order to close this deal, we're going to have to use the line of credit from our other properties to pay for it. Not getting an actual mortgage or a loan. We're just running out of time. We'll use the line, we'll pay for it that way, and then we'll keep keep fighting the money stuff. But then the insurance people said, "Oh, Bob, it's not your principal residence, so can't really give you the insurance." And the insurance was going to be astronomically more money. It was like almost double. And so for me, that this was like a year ago. And so if you want to live the Canadian dream because you're watching rappers on MTV and they all have this, it's still, under the Indian Act, we're still
Bob,
a
I
long
thought this
ways
was a
away.
20-year-old story, not last year.
Oh,
Oh
the
my
the
goodness.
the mortgage story is new. Like honestly, I was scrambling. We're like, okay, we'll take this line of credit and that, and we'll throw in some of our own cash, but it was really the insurance stuff. And then I found out, talking to my friend at Comox, that, yeah, it's like twice as much and it's continuing to go up because reserve properties aren't connected often to neighboring municipalities and the construction codes are different. So the insurers are nervous about that. All of that's to say we give up. We gave up and we bought a really nice townhouse in a suburb and it went flawlessly, just like it should for people of our credit rating.
Wow.
We got the loan within a week and the insurance wasn't a problem at all,
Yeah.
and the only difference was, so I'm always trying to tell the youth, don't wait for the Indian Act to help you. It's not there to help you. It's actually there to do the opposite.
Right, to
It's
hinder
not,
you in the worst way. I can't believe it. I'm so
and
sorry that happened, and I really appreciate you, describing this, that this happened in 2024. This isn't something that happened 20 or 40 years ago. So
yeah,
thank
the
you for
car was
sharing
about
that.
20 years ago. But
Yes.
yeah, and for me, how do we break free of this? It really, I was going to the Magic Kingdom when I was still working at Hydro. I had a lot of holidays, and we had kids were little, and we are going to Florida to the Magic Kingdom. And just about a week before we were to go, the mainstream media picked up on a story that the Seminole tribe of South Florida had bought the Hard Rock Cafe international gaming and food chain. And I was thinking, okay, who are these Seminoles? And I said to Cindy, I said, hey, can we carve a day out of the Magic Kingdom? They've got a cultural center and some ecotourism opportunities. I just want to go see if anybody will talk to me. And she said, sure, that would be great. So we went to the cultural center. I signed in with my traditional name, Kaksamalagalese, and said I was from the Gwawanook Nation. And they had everybody that signed in, the person would look at who signed in. They looked and went running at the back, came out with a manager, and he came running over. Hey, are you an Indian? And I was like, yeah, first, well, no, you can call me that. Yeah, I'm an Indian. And he was like, you want a tour? And I said, I'd love a tour. And
Awesome.
this is my family. And he's like, come on, let's go. And so, we're going through and he's backstage pass stuff, right? He said, so what do you want to know? And I said, well, first of all, how many Seminole tribe members are there here? And he said 1,200. And I said, second of all, how does a tribe of 1,200 people buy the Hard Rock Cafe for $1 billion? I'm sure you have the same problems that I do in Canada and maybe even more, but what gets you there? And he said, well, way back in, I think he said 82 or 83, we were sitting around the tribal council table and we're talking about Indian affairs and whether we were going to make it with their help. And what we realized and what we decided is we're not going to make it. The Seminoles will die out and there'll be people here, but they won't be Seminoles. And so we're not going to make it. And we decided based on that thought to get into business. And so we didn't have anything. We didn't have, two sticks to rub together, but we did have a rec center, so we did a bingo night. And that turned into two and three and five and seven and then, it was going full time. And then we saw an adjacent bingo parlor come up for sale. We bought that one and we bought another one. And then we found this old casino and bought it. And what I realized was that they just got into the economy and with whatever tools that they had, it was all about cultural survival. They monopoly gamed their way into the Hard Rock Cafe, and now they're just, they had aggregate businesses and ecotourism, and they put their focus on helping their kids get educated, trained, and help place them in jobs. And I mean, it was just full support, really with this goal of self-determination, self-reliance on in their long-term path. And that inspired me because I'd been wrestling like you with at that time, my journey was how do we get out of this mess? This is like a gong show and
Yep.
a nightmare for the future of our nation. How do we get out of this mess?
Yep.
And so to hear that story, it really just came to a decision. And I think that's where we are today. And certainly for the youth, hopefully it doesn't take your nation this long to get to this decision, but you just have to get there. And I can say
Yes.
that pretty confidently right now. Indigenous Services Canada and CERNAC, the other side of it,
Yeah.
have just cut 2 point something billion dollars for the budget. So
Yeah.
their ability to look after all of our status Indians has never been there
No.
and never will be. And we just
Yeah.
cut an extra 2 billion. So you got to reduce what we're able to look after, which means more people are going to leave the reserve. And
Yeah.
so I did this workshop with a community here on Vancouver Island, and they were, Bob, what do we do about this? And I said, I'm going to talk, and I hope you'll let me finish. The longer I talk, the more sense it'll make. But I said, we've got to take a Seminole tribe tact. I said, one of the things, if you first of all, how many people you got on your waiting list, band waiting list for housing? And I said 186 or something like that. And I said, okay, so you need houses. How would you how would you feel about buying houses outside this reserve, like out in regular land? Because if you did that, you would be a pretty good landlord. You had a waiting list of 186 people for properties you could buy. You could put your people in there, and with the help of whether they're employed or on social assistance, you could be paying for those houses. And like other Canadians have been able to do when they appreciate in value, you could take the equity out and go buy another house and put another one of your families in there. And you could keep doing that. And with your crazy 7 generations thinking, think about Warren Buffett. Look at what Warren Buffett did in one lifetime. If you were buying real estate with the view to hold and house your people and make money as an investment, I mean, 7 generations, you would be a political and economic powerhouse. Plus, your people would be housed, and you also have training institutions and educational institutions to help them find good jobs. So you're placing them in good jobs to help you pay for your real estate, which you're borrowing against the equity to buy more houses. I think 7 generations, you'll own half the valley. And
Which is
then I said,
wonderful.
and I said, the other thing you could do here is you could start buying businesses. So I'm getting old. I'm a boomer. So, 10, 15 years tops kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people. You could buy the local sign company, the budget rent a car, fast food franchises. There's lots of businesses here in your territory that are to come up for sale. You could buy those businesses, use your funding for training and education and job placement to put your people in there to help get them jobs with, resume fillers and letters of reference, and they could manage your business. And, you start buying those businesses so you pay your people well so they can afford to pay for your real estate, which you take the equity out to buy more real estate. You do that for 7 generations. I mean, you'll be unstoppable.
Yeah.
It'll be crazy. But you already are pushing back on me, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking we don't buy our own land, and and
Yeah.
I it's like a mental barrier, that really is what you're talking about here. And so if you can push past that, though, you're not giving up anything. You're not surrendering your legal interest. Your land acknowledgement stuff is still there. It's never going away. It increases in value. What you're doing is solving your short-term problems with some of the tools that you haven't used, which are hard to access for you. But so you don't really give anything up. The upside is protection of the culture. Later on, you can figure out what to do with all of that stuff. And so they were pretty interested to hear that. And that's what I would share for your youth, certainly, just to say, hey,
Well, I think it's wonderful. I seen in the back here one of the resources that you had given was actually Calvin's book, and
mhm.
he had talked a lot about that as well. And I think, you know, you gave such sound advice, and I haven't read his book. So literally one of the resources that you gave, I'm like, I haven't read this book. I'm gonna have to make a part of the book club for the next year. So your book is January, by the way.
All right. I can build on that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I appreciate you thinking outside the box. We did not have that opportunity to do things like that beforehand. So,
Mm.
um, helping change the mindset, I think is also a big part of it. When you've been oppressed for 150 years, you need to, be thinking differently and outside that box. So I think, these are just some great skills. I have appreciated every minute you've been willing to give me. So I say thank you with all my heart, Mossy Cho. And is there any other lasting thoughts that you would like to send out for anybody who might be listening?
We're going to go listen to Freddie Mercury's song, I Want to Break Free.
I approve of that song.
And, I think we tell the story in the book too. It's about the elephant, the circus elephant. In the old days, you had traveling circuses, they'd set up tents and, they'd have a baby elephant they would tie a big rope around its leg and tie it to a stake, pound the stake into the ground. And it was a baby elephant. There's nothing it could do. It couldn't pull the stake out. It couldn't break the rope. And, but eventually it becomes a 4-ton behemoth who could just start walking and it would be able to get out of that, right? And so I think that's really what we have to do is just break free of the Indian Act.
I
And
love it.
I use the words dismantle very carefully.
Yeah.
It is possible to get out of it completely, and I think the Niska did a pretty good job of that. But then, some stuff has come back to uh, to be worked on since. But so we could dismantle all of the portions that hold back the individuals, but maintain the fiduciary duty to the nations. That seems to be what they're concerned about. And so we chose the word, and we really hope that you'll join the conversation, learn as much as you can about self-government, whether it's through us or Kelvin or Jody or anybody. Like you say, we just need to keep learning. Podcasts, blogs, vlogs, wherever you get your information. I think there's going to be a lot of chatter next year about this, and we gave you some good hints and tips on how to be safe and not we're not confronting people, and we're just trying to add more information. It'll be good for the country, good for the economy, good for our nations. I think it's just the next step, and we can't let it go on. I will say just the last thing, I bumped into my dad probably in the summer, and he said, "What are you working on?" I said, "I'm just getting ready to release 21 Things You May Not Know About Self-Government." And he looked at me and he said, "Are we ready?" And I was like, I had the same reaction. I chuckled and I said, "Whoa,
Yeah.
the fact that you're asking me that question makes me nervous." Because
Yeah.
I'm arguing largely to our Canadian citizen brethren that we should get beyond it. And so I spent 6 weeks trying to find an answer to "Are we ready?" Because I figured if he's asking, that's going to be for our youth and communities and Canadians too. Are we ready?
Yeah.
And so, my first kick at that was ready is a feeling, it's not an action, but it's not still not enough. I live in this very short, 7-second soundbite world, and I bumped into my guide and mentor and friend Cheryl Brooks, who hired me at BC Hydro's Aboriginal Relations Department. I said, "Cheryl, this is my conundrum." I told my dad I'm doing a book on self-government. He said, "Are we ready?" And she just, in her very classic way, too, looked at me and said, Bob Joseph, we've been self-governing for 10,000 years. We've self-governed even through the Indian Act. We've protected our territories and looked after our people and resources. I'm not even sure why we're asking the question, but you can see how the Indian Act would make people feel like, we're not ready. So, anyways, for the youth, you have an inherent right to self-government. You should exercise it.
Oh, I
And
couldn't agree more. And I agree with you, and I believe that wholeheartedly. That and your book is the reason that I'm going to constantly talk about the Indian Act and 150-year anniversary with this of how we move forward. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for writing this book. I thank you for your previous publications, and thank you so much for your time today. And just know I'm in solidarity and grateful for all that you've done for all of us nationally, let alone, just individually inspire folks like me and my daughter. So thank you.
yeah, I'm glad to be a part of your journey. And for me, it's the same journey. I might be just a little bit ahead, but The other thing I was going to say, if you want some copies for contests for what you're doing, just get a hold of Laura and tell her I said, you know, send you 5 copies so you can gift them or have prizes for questions or, anything that you might do with some copies.
I
I'll even
love
sign
that.
them.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. I can't thank you enough for all your generosity and your humbleness to help our world move forward in such a good way. Thank you. Thank you. And I will reach out.
Please do. Please do. Remember, it's for all of our kids.
Right. And that's just it. So if we can empower these kids and these books empower me, hopefully they'll empower the kids and we'll just next generation, next generation, next generation.
Yes.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for
All right.
today. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be of service.
What a blessing to have this man join us today. I hope you got lots from it. I hope you consider getting this book for yourself and being a part of our book club for anybody interested. We do our book club every second Monday of each month, and I'm going to be releasing a 2026 list here right away. But obviously, our first one's going to be 21 Things You Need to Know about Indigenous Self Government, and that will be our January book club. And I promise you, I've already almost read it, and I just opened it this morning. So it's a really great book. Strongly recommend it. Hope everybody joins us for that. And if you are, reading the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you've read the National Inquiry, you want to act and do more. Locally, we have the Reconciliation Action Group. Nationally, go to your churches, go to your sports club, go to your business, start that work and do the action part that needs to be done so that we can move forward and no other kid gets to hear terrible things about their people from here on in. Mossy Cho to my ancestors, to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through that example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian roots and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation proud Calgarian. Mossy Cho to my husband, Darcy. He produces, he edits, but he's my husband. He's my childhood friend, father of our child, and my support down this journey of the Red Road, witnessing decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily, and we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcast, pin posts, and likely the link for our next book club for next year. Lastly, I always want to do a touch grass moment of happiness because I talk about dark things. But so far, the AHS has been good on my mom's hip and my dad's heart. And I got to witness many people in the same bout over the last 2 months. Very grateful that we had some health care despite all of the forces trying to dismantle it. So thank you. And lastly, side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. Or my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you, folks, for listening.